This is the Silver Divorce Podcast, broadcast from the Whitfield Media Group studios in Chattanooga, Tennessee. We're here to offer education, stories, and support for people age 50 plus who are facing or considering divorce. I'm your host, Lisa, and before we get started, I'd like to ask you to email us your topic suggestions, your ideas, your questions at silverdivorcepodcast@gmail.com or join the conversation on our Facebook and Instagram pages at Silver Divorce Podcast. And now, let's podcast. So today, we're going to explore a topic that most people only speak about in hushed tones, or maybe they don't talk about it at all, and that is sexual intimacy after divorce. I am so pleased to have an expert to help guide the discussion, Karisa Kaye.
Hi, Lisa. Thanks for having me.
Oh, Chris, I'm so excited to have you.
But, it's a pleasure to be here.
Well, before we jump into it, though, we always start with out of the house.
Okay.
And we did that just so people could get to know us a little better. And then also, one of the issues that single people face, newly divorced, is social isolation. They tend to isolate. So just to spark some ideas. Well, for me, last episode on Does God Hate Divorce with Betsy, I talked about how I had not been to church because I felt so emotional while I was there and I had taken a hiatus. Well, after our discussion on faith and divorce and scripture, I felt like it was time to go back. And so I did go back, and I have to tell you, I felt such joy sitting there and having the music wash over me, and it was just such a wonderful sense of calm and peace.
Good for you.
Yeah,
That's awesome.
It is. And then to top it off, there was a visiting speaker, and he was a man who had been a pastor, had a career change, a major life change, and he was talking about how during that whole process, he started to think, why am I not trusting God to catch me as I jump off this cliff? He said, my whole career was about faith and believing that God would be there. And it was ironic because I had been thinking about that as well. I went through the divorce after 34 years of marriage, but with this podcast, really wanting it to launch and growing it. And I thought, why didn't I trust God to catch me as I took this big leap? So it was very affirming. I was really glad I went.
Good for you.
Just encourage everybody that's hesitating. It can be a place of solace and joy and comfort.
Yes, absolutely. Do your listeners know, Lisa, when you and I had brunch a week or two ago and we talked about this podcast, are your listeners aware of all of your... you're so humble. Are they aware of your amazing credentials and how blessed they are to even have you podcasting?
No, I don't really talk about my background.
Well, I'm going to jump in as another professional and mention that it's a complete honor to know you, and that the
sweet.
people that have mentioned you to me have only sang your praises. So to the listeners, Lisa is a queen. But she's not ever going to brag about that. So y'all are very blessed and fortunate to have Lisa as a podcaster.
Well, thank you for that.
Yes, ma'am.
So let me brag about you because on our brunch, I have to say that you have an amazing family. Every single person in your family is involved in the medical industry and involved in saving lives. And I found that quite remarkable. And I also found that you have a beautiful soul.
And thanks, Lisa.
It really is shaped by an inner quest to help people find who they are and so that they can live their very best life. And that's a true calling.
Well, thank you. Praise the Lord for that.
Well, and for your professional credentials,
yes, ma'am.
You have that bachelor's degree in interdisciplinary studies from LeTourneau University. I hope I said that right.
Yes, ma'am. East Texas.
Go, what is it, Longhorns or?
No, it's not even close to as impressive. It's the little yellow jackets. They're math and science, so athletic prowess hasn't been their strong suit in the past. They're working on that.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, you have your master's in marriage and family therapy from Richmond Graduate University. And you are a PhD candidate in clinical sexology at the Modern Sex Therapy Institute.
Yes, ma'am.
You're a certified sex therapist, Christian sex therapist and complex trauma counselor.
Yes, ma'am.
And your practice is right here in Chattanooga, Tennessee.
It sure is. I love us relationship and intimacy counseling.
That is wonderful. I
Thank you.
love the combination of Christian sex counseling, because
Yes,
a lot
ma'am.
of people think that, as Christians, that we're not supposed to talk about sex.
I know. But we should be talking about it the most.
Right.
Yes.
Yeah, exactly.
Yes, ma'am.
So let's go ahead and let's talk about
Let's do it.
our listeners. Our typical listeners, 50 plus.
Okay.
And they've been in a long-term marriage that is decades long.
Sure.
And we commonly hear in those marriages that physical intimacy tends to be put on the back burner and it's neglected. So studies have shown that lack of physical intimacy is cited as one of the top 4 reasons for divorce.
Yes, ma'am.
But ironically, affairs are the number 1 reason
Yes.
for divorce.
Sure.
So lack of physical intimacy, it does tend to lead to a sense of neglect,
Absolutely.
loneliness.
Yes, ma'am.
People can feel like they're just not connected to their spouse anymore. You hear the term, we grew apart. So would you share your perspective on how and why this happens?
Okay, sure. And for what it's worth, for context, we could talk about that for about 8 hours. So I'm going to try and sum that up. One of the big frustrations for me, just as a sexologist, sex therapist, etc., is everything's connected. Most of us are never taught that everything is connected, but everything is connected. So I'm going to try and give you some bullet points for why people grow apart or why their love life tends to suffer. And then if you have any questions, I guess, Miss Lisa, feel free to ask me to expound.
Yeah.
But when I was thinking about how to answer this, I was like, oh my goodness, this could be a 4-hour lecture. Okay. So, so big picture, what we're seeing right now with people is physical health and mental health. I think it's 42% of America right now is obese. Over 65% is overweight. So just from a physical health perspective, sex is a physical act, right? And depending on what kind of sex you have, everyone has different types of sex. Some sex is a cardiovascular event. I mean, it all is, but some people tend to be more athletic or vigorous, etc. So when you're out of shape, sex takes energy. Well, if I don't have energy to get up and go for a walk or take care of the day-to-day, it's going to be harder for me to think about sex and feel excited about that. So it's different for men and women. Women, the top 2 things that influence desire for women, and desire and drive are different. Drive tends to be hormonally based, a biological craving, like an orgasm sounds great, skin on skin sounds great. Desire it could be constituted as more responsive, like I just want to be close. I don't need an orgasm or a release. I just want to be close and enjoy the sensuality, for example. So drive and desire are different, but the things that influence desire for women are energy level and body image. And for men, it tends to be a lot of hormone-based. And so most men right now are hormonally very imbalanced and have low testosterone issues or not in their optimal range as far as hormonal health. So the chemical composition that makes people hungry for sex or think about sex, most Americans are not balanced in that, right? So there's a lot of diabetes, pre-diabetes, and women we're seeing a rise in PCOS, insulin resistance, et cetera, that impacts blood sugar, which impacts brain health, et cetera, brain fog, motivation, lethargy, et cetera, tissue health. So our genitals are very vascular. So if our vascular health is suffering, blood flow, et cetera, with the diabetes, for example, our genitals are going to experience that as well. Smoking, drinking. So mental illness, mental health, physical health, hormone imbalances, stress and exhaustion and distractions. Also another grouping that I see as a mental health professional. Stress basically puts the human brain into fight or flight. So fight or flight long term works against a lot of healthy things for us as humans, to include sexual responsiveness. So there's this thing called vacation sex, especially for women. So the average male, if he's healthy, has 15 to 20 times the amount of testosterone the average female does. So they can kind of override a lot of things, like let's use sex for this, let's use sex for that. Sex sounds good for anxiety, stress, I'm bored, let's celebrate, I'm sad. Women were a little more complicated. So for ladies, this vacation sex notion is I'm away, I'm resting, there's no more stress, I'm not worried about the nest, the kids, my responsibilities. I can get out of my head, be in my body. Maybe I'm sleeping better because of that. Hey, you know what sounds fun? Why don't we get together and play naked?
Yeah. That's really interesting. So do you think that women tend to obsess more about their weight and their body image, and
Yeah,
if they
I do.
have gotten overweight through childbirth and hormone changes and everything that happens,
Yeah.
they're less likely to agree, where a man, maybe that doesn't bother him as much, right?
Yes,
they're like,
yes, yeah. I think beauty for us as women, and this would go back to my personal theology and spirituality. I think the feminine beauty is so deeply personal for us, and it's very connected to vulnerability. So if I don't feel beautiful myself, so this could go. I don't think it's just weight stuff. There are women of all shapes and sizes and all ages that feel insecure. And that's a whole nother sociological phenomenon right now with the influence of social media on body dysmorphia in younger generations. We're really seeing an uptick in that for men and women, and the pornography industry has really negatively influenced body image for men and women. So I think body image for women tends to be a more vulnerable thing, but I think men more and more becoming more self-conscious. And but for us ladies, if we don't feel good and we don't feel pretty, I don't want to get naked and then offer myself to you.
I can relate to that, just simply being,
Sure.
older.
But you are beautiful.
Much older.
We can be older and beautiful.
The thought of,
Yeah.
getting naked in front of somebody after you've been with the same person for 34
Sure.
years is scary.
Sure.
It's not something that I would easily do. Of course, you never know.
Yeah.
If Brad Pitt showed up in front.
Yeah, and for me as a sex therapist, that goes into a lot of other things. Like, do you feel loved and adored outside of the bedroom? Does a person feel wanted and cherished outside of sex? Because when I feel safe and secure in that regard, I feel more okay with taking my clothes off with you.
Yeah.
Does that make sense?
Right, that does. And does that go back to the connection, the touch, the emotional connection?
Absolutely.
Not every touch has to lead to sex, but just simply being connected so you feel loved by that person.
Yes. Non-sexual touch is what I call that as a sex therapist. So women on average, now this gets into a whole nother, again, we talked for days on this,
Right.
This whole thing called attachment theory. I don't know if you've heard that, Lisa,
No,
but
I
it's,
have not.
so in therapy land, there are 300 plus models of therapy that we as clinicians can align with and practice from. One of those is called attachment theory, and that has to do with how I regulate my emotions, but how I learn to bond with my caregivers and then other humans and then with myself, et cetera, et cetera. So how I learn to relate to myself in the world. So there are 4 different types of attachment styles, and all of those influence how we do connection, how we do touch, how I do sex, and we could talk on a whole nother podcast about that. But our attachment styles, there's anxious, there's the secure attachment style. That's the goal for all of us. There's anxious attachment, avoidant attachment, and then disorganized, which is come here, go away. So all 4 of those mindsets, or all 4 of those attachment styles, have a different psychology with how they approach sex. We can talk about that in a little bit with some of the other questions that I read.
Yeah.
But the non-sexual touch is really huge, especially for women. And because a lot of the work that I do is most women don't get touch from their husbands unless their husbands want sex. So then the brain starts to pair touch with performance anxiety. Oh,
Right.
he's touching me. He's going to want me to put out. He's going to want me to have sex. And so women start avoiding touch altogether versus, oh, this hug is just a hug.
Right.
This kiss is just a kiss. You're just rubbing my back. You're just playing with my hair. You just want to hold my leg just because you want to be close. And women love that. I think Virginia Satir, she was a marriage and family therapist a few decades ago, and she did an interesting study on women. The average female needs 12 non-sexual hugs a day to thrive.
Wow.
Yeah.
I believe that.
Yeah.
Just simply touch without the expectation that it's going to lead to something.
Yeah. And for
bigger.
us ladies, the feminine energy tends to be more frenetic or anxious, and estrogen plays into that, etc. So for a solid, wonderful masculine man to come and just hug us and hold us, it feels containing, it feels grounding, it feels anchoring, it calms our nervous system down. That's called co-regulation, and that's really nice.
Yeah.
So women want to feel safe, and when we feel safe and secure, then I can open up and enjoy other things with you. Does that make sense?
It makes total sense.
Yeah.
It is creating that closeness.
Yes, ma'am.
Thinking about it all the time, and not just when you want something to happen.
Yes, ma'am.
So, okay, so let's talk about if you've been in a long-term marriage and that physical intimacy has been absent for a long time. Do you find that people make recapturing that a priority, perhaps before they've taken time to heal? Or do they have that fear like I have?
You mean after divorce?
Yes.
Lisa?
Yeah.
Okay, so you're saying like if somebody's been married and their sex life hasn't been on the radar as a priority. And then once they get divorced, you're asking, do I find that it's more prevalent or more prioritized?
Right.
Yes. And a lot of that is instinctively kind of human behavior. And so there's an interesting psychology amongst all of us that it's kind of like, and depending on who, and this isn't necessarily faith-based, but it's kind of like when people go through divorce, a lot of the people I work with, all of a sudden they want to start going back to the gym. All of a sudden they're doing more aesthetically. And there's something instinct, or even dating. I see this with people who go through breakups. All of a sudden, subconsciously, I got to make myself more attractive because I want to be selected. So that's a human behavior, human psychology thing. People wake up and they're like, I'm available again. Now what am I going to do? And who's going to want me? And I got to make myself attractive. So that just happens for a lot of us subconsciously. And then depending on gender and depending on the individual, sex means different things. So you and I talked about this over brunch.
Right, yes.
It's like some people turn to sex for reassurance, for self-soothing. They run out and want to feel wanted because maybe they didn't feel wanted. So then they maybe hypersexualize themselves or their behaviors because it's like that experience of rejection or abandonment. It's like, I want somebody to want me.
Right. A lot of times even men are given advice that the fastest way to get over somebody is to go out and have as much sex with many different women as you can.
It's totally poisonous. Totally poisonous. And I tell the men I work with, please give your brain and your body and your heart space for grief. Because if you're going to set yourself up for success later, you need to do a solid 2 years of work around, we call it like a marriage autopsy. What was good? What wasn't healthy? What didn't work? What part did I have to play? What part did they have to play? Why was I drawn to this person? Where did things start falling apart? And you have to grieve that. If you ignore grief, it's going to catch up and bite you later. And oftentimes people pendulum swing. Like, oh, well, that was awful. So what's the complete opposite? Oh, he's different or she's totally different. And then 2 years in, they're like, well, that's not really what I wanted either. It was just a response or a reaction. So that time to grieve and process after the end of a marriage is really essential for setting people up for healthy relationships. The stats actually used to say the average 60% of marriages ended in divorce the first marriages. Second time was 75%. Second marriages end in divorce. And then the third marriage was 90%. And the majority of that is because people don't slow down and do their work and heal. It's too painful to sit there with yourself and your stuff. So I just got to distract myself with something new. But grief, you're going to carry it around. It's going to impact that relationship.
Yeah. And oftentimes for women, casual sex is dangerous.
Yes, ma'am.
It's physically and mentally dangerous.
Emotionally. Yeah. Oh, yeah. Yeah, I don't know if you want me to speak to that at all. Yeah, so for one, let's just talk about STDs and STIs. So here in Chattanooga, for example, syphilis is on the rise. So like, who the heck hears about syphilis anymore? I have connections at the health department. They talk about the new rates of syphilis that are on the rise and gonorrhea and chlamydia. The number one, this is too gross, so you just tell me. It used to be in Tennessee, the number one cause of oral cancer for young men was HPV.
Oh.
Transmitted through oral sex.
Right.
And so HPV prevalency amongst the non-monogamous right now in the hookup culture, it's 60 to 70% of people are carrying that. Well, for us, and that's just skin-on-skin contact. That doesn't even have to be penetration or what have you, fluids. So that's concerning because some of those strains can lead to cervical cancer for women, right? And so if just from an infection perspective, right, the health piece for us ladies, I mentioned this at brunch the other day, like women always pay a higher price when it comes to sex in every way. Emotionally, physically, like most of our organs are internal, right? And most of a male's sexual organs are external. So even if they are carrying HPV, let's say it manifests as a wart. Okay, well, you can burn that off. For us ladies, it's internal, and we have to have all sorts of procedures done. And then the cells internally proliferate very quickly, et cetera, et cetera. So we as women, our bodies, we're just more vulnerable during sex biologically, and then it's connected to our emotions and our psychology. We're just, from a faith perspective, I believe the good Lord designed us to connect. Like sex is supposed to be the most vulnerable human act that we can have with another person, and it's designed to connect us. And then chemically, there are 7 different chemicals that are released that facilitate connection. And so for us to try to have sex without attachment or connection, we're actually creating mental illness in that. And we could talk forever about that.
Yeah, it is really interesting because you do read, women will go out to seek somebody. They want to have their self-esteem raised. They want to feel better about themselves after what they've been through.
Sure.
And then if they have casual sex, they have tremendous guilt and remorse.
Or they feel used, or they
Right.
feel vulnerable, or they get attached, and then they feel desperate, and then they're mad that they're desperate, and it feels needy, and it's a mess.
Right.
Yes.
And then the man might think less of them.
Totally.
It seems like, the opinion of the woman goes down because she had sex after the first date, but
Yes, ma'am.
so
Yeah.
did he.
That's right. Yes, but we know
That's the irony of it.
Absolutely. So culturally, there are very different standards for men and women, unfortunately, when it comes to the psychology of sexual behavior.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Right.
Yes, ma'am.
So, but there are definite health benefits to sex.
Tons.
Right.
Yeah, we are pro sex in my office. Yeah, but it's a very powerful thing. So I don't know if you want me to speak to the health benefits.
Please do. We can't be all, down negative on sex.
So
right?
for people that are in a healthy relationship or trying to be in a healthy relationship, I'll say, sex is a built-in medicine cabinet. So as stressed out and de-energized or whatever, that's not even a real word, I'm just making it up, that people are, sex is designed to be like a version of Eden. It's supposed to be like paradise. It's supposed to be an escape. You can psychologically escape, mentally escape, physically escape. It's supposed to be euphoric. It was supposed to be a gift. Oxytocin shuts down the amygdala, which is the threat center in the brain. So oxytocin is bonding, and it helps me calm down and feel close. It's also released when we laugh together, when we have prolonged eye contact with other humans, hugging, kissing, dancing, and breastfeeding. So oxytocin is like, we call it love potion number 9. So oxytocin's released in high doses, and actually for men, when they have sex with their partner, their body and brains flood with it at 500 times the normal amount. So men often use sex to access their emotions and to have their emotion. They use it as their emotional conversation, and women want to have that emotional connection before sex. So that's a very gendered, interesting difference.
It is.
But men, so I try to coach women in that as well and teach men about what are you so hungry for in sex? And oftentimes it's, I just feel close. That's when I feel closest. That's when I feel the most connected.
And the woman needs to feel close before that happens.
Yes, absolutely.
Isn't that ironic?
I know. We're going to talk to the Lord about that when I get to heaven.
Right.
Like, what were you doing? But both are important. So oxytocin, dopamine, that's a huge conversation, right? But dopamine is our pleasure-seeking chemical. It allows us to feel pleasure. It's excitatory. So that floods the brain for men and women. That actually looks like a person using cocaine or meth. So dopamine is it's part of our reward center. Serotonin, super important for ladies and men, but it's basically our happy neurotransmitter. It has to do with satiation, satiety. It's like, hey, I've had enough and I'm content. I'm happy. It's what light produces. Vitamin D helps produce that, and the gut actually produces more than the brain. So serotonin's huge. You have vasopressin, which has to do with territorialism and jealousy. So this is my person, don't come near them. It usually is much more prevalent in the brains of men after having sex with a partner. Phenylethylamine, which is what they think chocolate mimics. So I don't know if you've heard that conversation.
No, I have not.
Yeah, but that's interesting. I'm trying to think. Norepinephrine, which helps with, it's a stimulant. It's like concentration, and then endorphins. Endorphins are basically like natural opiates. So those are pain relievers. So just those 7 chemicals from sex with your partner, like connected sex with your partner, like you're going to feel better, right? So a lot of the ladies I work with, I'm like, do you have a partner that you love and you feel safe with? And well, yeah. Okay, well then have more sex. Sometimes sex is the therapy.
Right.
Does that make sense?
That makes a lot of sense.
Yeah, and then vascular health, of course. That's huge as far as pelvic floor health. Both men and women have pelvic floors. That has to do with our excretory system, reproductive organs, digestive organs, etc. But like if you're going to orgasm, you have to keep your pelvic floor fairly taut, not overly tight and not overly weak. But the pelvic floor is really important for orgasm response and urinary continence and what have you. We could talk. I have a few people on my podcast that talk about pelvic floor health, but that's important for men and women. Again, stress management helps people sleep better. Yeah, sex is a blessing in a lot of ways, physically.
It is, but it sounds like it requires that emotional connection with a committed partner.
the ideal.
The
Absolutely.
ideal. And
Yes.
you may not achieve all of that
That's
if you're
right.
out having casual sex.
That's right. The hookup sex, you're not going to have even close to the same experience. And I think that's God's built-in, is it obsolescence when something's
Right,
built to break
yes,
down?
yes.
That's just his fail-safe.
You're right.
Like, you can do it your way, but it's just not going to be close to as satisfying.
It's not going to be close.
Yeah.
It's like a
Yeah.
facade.
You got it.
Right.
Yes,
so you,
ma'am.
you really need to take the time to
Connect and get to know.
Connect.
Yes.
get to know that person.
If you want the
And-
good stuff, yes.
Yeah, right. If you want to get to
Yes.
the pinnacle, if
Yes,
you will,
ma'am.
of everything that was intended as
Yes.
an outcome of sex.
Yeah, and what culture doesn't teach is that the longer you're with someone, if you both are intentional about growing your love life, your sex is just going to keep getting better. Mm-hmm. But you have to be intentional about it. One of the answers to the first question is people stop being deliberate about their love life. They start to take it for granted and they get lazy.
Yes, you do see, especially if when you're raising kids
Sure.
and you're working, and you tend to put that on the back burner when really it should be on the front burner, right?
Yes, absolutely.
Yeah.
And Dr. Barry McCarthy, he's a sex therapist who's one of my professors in my PhD program. He practices in DC. He's written a lot of books on sexual performance in men, like erectile dysfunction, premature ejaculation, and he coaches men on how to slow down and be better lovers. He has some fascinating research on how a couple, when their sex life is good, it will energize the marriage of up to 25 to 30% of its energy as a couple.
Wow. So is there a guideline for like how often should you be having sex if you're a committed couple?
Yeah, I think it depends on the couple.
Really?
Yeah.
Okay.
So if I meet with a couple, I'm asking what feels good for both of you. Mm-hmm. Like how often, what kind of sex do you want to have? Who's initiating? Are we taking turns? Are we changing up where you're having it, how you're having it? Like that's going to look different for every single couple. So that's kind of fun. Like everyone gets to customize it. Mm-hmm. It used to be the average married couple was having sex once a week, I think. My recommendation is try for at least twice, because the thing about female sexuality, especially in long-term monogamous relationships, is the female brain and body need to be reminded. So the longer a woman goes without sex, often the less she wants it, unless she's high testosterone or has some other stuff going on, because some women are operating in sex addiction, relationship addiction, etc. And then the longer men go without it, usually the more they want it. So that's another
Totally
difference.
opposite.
Yeah,
right?
yeah. So females in
Yeah.
long-term relationships, after about year 2, need to be reminded, oh yeah, this feels good. We should do this more often. So I
Right.
usually tell couples, try for at least twice a week.
Yeah. Okay. That's a good guideline.
To
know
Yeah, and then to converse.
and be intentional.
Yes, ma'am. That's the thing is like Dr. Emily Nagoski, she wrote Come As You Are. That's a great book about female sexuality and the brain and all sorts of fascinating stuff about that. She said that couples that report long-term satisfaction in their love life had 2 things in common. One, they believed that their partner had their back. There was deep trust and a sense of loyalty, which means I can let go and just surrender to you and trust you, which is the foundation of any healthy human relationship. And then the second one was they just prioritized it. So instead of going out every weekend, instead of we're doing trips and we're doing this event and we're going to stay in. We're going to stay in tonight, or we're going to go away this weekend. They just prioritized it.
Wow.
Yeah.
I'm going to tell a story
Yeah.
on
Yeah, yeah.
my aunt, and hopefully she's not listening.
Maybe she is.
But she and her husband, they had a really wonderful relationship, and they were very high touch. You know, you would see them holding hands or rubbing.
Love it.
And I remember as kids, we would be there and they would tell us, you know, you kids go outside. We're going to go take a nap.
I love
and, you know,
it. I love
and
it.
now looking back on that, we
Yeah.
all know what that nap was,
Yes.
but they were intentional
love
about
it.
doing that. And
That's
so,
beautiful.
you know, just thinking of everything you've said, you know, it brought that to mind because
Yeah.
they were very high touch.
Yeah. Yeah. You know, and if you're into monogamy, I mean, there's a whole new thing now where people are all over the place with open relationships, etc. But if you're monogamous, where was I going to go with that? Prioritize, high touch. The thing that sets you apart as lovers, in theory, is sex. Because I'm not out having sex with anyone else.
Right.
We've committed that you're the only person that I'm sharing this with. So if we're committed, then we better be intentional about showing up in that commitment.
Absolutely.
Does that make sense? Like if we're taking all the other options off the table,
You better be
Don't
serious
starve me.
and be
Don't
there.
starve
Right,
me. Yeah,
exactly.
yeah.
So I want to talk about when you have jumped into the dating pool and
Yes,
you've
ma'am.
seen someone for one dates or several dates, knowing when the time is right for physical intimacy. And, you know, I alluded to that earlier. one story really struck me. This woman had talked about being on 4 dates and they were intimate. And then she wondered if he would think less of her. And you see that all the time where women are saying, well, we had 1 date or 2 dates and then we're intimate. Did I do the right thing? And, what is kind of, how should you think through that if you were starting to date? And obviously you're going to be really worried right from the get-go as when's the right time if it's clicking with this person.
Yeah, that's a huge, awesome question. I'm going to try and offer a few different things to think about for people. So one, again, this is going to have to do with attachment style. So certain attachment styles want to have sex right now. I need to lock you in. I need to connect with you right now. I need that reassurance by having sex with you right away. So that's something to consider, and that's not always healthy. We know that the sooner we start having sex in a dating relationship, the more we emotionally stunt the rest of the growth, because sex is fun. It's the most fun. It's supposed to be fun, and it kind of takes over, and it becomes the priority. And instead of getting to know you, know how you treat your family, know what you want in life, know about your faith walk, know how you treat the server at the restaurant, how you handle your finances, are you honest, are you respectful, are you trustworthy? As soon as we start playing naked, that's a heck of a lot more fun. And then it very quickly masks, like we call it the honeymoon phase or the cocktail, the dopamine cocktail. It masks the rest of that. So then oftentimes about 12 to 18 months in, somebody will go, wait a minute, I didn't notice this about you before. I'm not even sure I like that. Do I like you? Well, the sex was fun and great, but I'm not sure I like the rest of you. So that's just something, all of us are sexual beings, and there are more single people than ever before. So that's what's really hard about if we want to practice celibacy for a while just to get to know people. That's a real challenge. That's hard. But there are a lot of benefits to withholding versus jumping in too soon. And as far as when is it too soon for you, unfortunately, our culture is perpetuating all this nonsense about hookup without consequences, a pornified mindset. Like some of my younger clients are talking about as they're trying to get to know people are sending pictures, nude pictures, genital shots, et cetera, and they haven't even met for dinner.
Oh my gosh.
To me,
crazy.
It's backwards. It's backwards. Like old school worked for a few different reasons. And it was meet somebody, you have conversations, so you connect eye to eye, face to face, and you talk and you start to get to know somebody. And then the old progression, which I think is healthier, was maybe we hold hands, maybe we hug.
Right.
Then we start with a kiss, and then we work our way to whatever we want to eventually. But right now it's like genitals first, and then I'm going to introduce you to my family.
Oh my gosh. It's like the old, it should be the old first base, second base.
Yeah, there's something to that.
Right?
There really is.
Because it's you get connected with the person's mind, right?
How
they
heart.
think and how they feel.
Absolutely. And their character, and are they trustworthy, and do I like you?
Right.
But if we just jump into bed and then I try to work backwards to get to know you, it's going to be very confusing for a lot of different reasons. And then the other thing I would say is, I think, men and women, I mean, I have male clients that would say this. If you feel pressured to have sex to keep the relationship going, just notice that. And is that your own stuff? Like, have you had trauma with that? Have you had negative experiences in the past? Is that pressure that your current dating partner is putting on you? Having sex because we feel pressured or the need to keep somebody pleased is, a lot of us fall into that, but it's the wrong reason to have sex.
Right.
So
sometimes you're putting pressure on yourself.
Totally.
Because you think it's expected, or you'll lose that person.
That's right. And you're going to end up resenting yourself and eventually resenting them. So if you can kind of pump the brakes and have a conversation ahead of time and say, hey, this is what I was thinking. I'd like to just spend some time getting to know you. And if we have great chemistry, depending on what you two decide together, trying to hold one another accountable or only meet up in certain places. So, because it's very easy to fall into when you meet somebody, you're like, oh, we have great chemistry. Let's do this. We're making out, and all of a sudden we're getting naked.
Especially if you haven't been having sex in a while, right?
Yeah.
There's the temptation.
Sure.
To just
people are hungry.
Right.
Skin hunger is a thing. Skin hunger.
Yeah. But that's, that makes a lot of sense to set the boundaries. Really, that's what you're doing, is somewhat boundary setting. Yeah,
and in the dating world nowadays, again, because of the hookup expectations and the pornified mindset, I've experienced this as a single woman trying to date. When, for me, for example, I'll pay attention to innuendos or suggestions or photos sent or requested, and I'll set a boundary and say, hey, I'm just not about that. Like, let's just not sexualize things right now. Can we get to know each other first? And depending on how that person responds, tells me whether or not I want to keep talking to you. So if you act like a jerk and I get punished, or you start insulting me or shaming me or getting passive aggressive, bye. Goodbye. You're not the person for me. You don't respect my boundaries. You clearly have a motive in mind. That's not my motive. Move on. Does that make sense?
It does, and sometimes I think that sexual innuendo is just testing the waters.
Totally.
Like how far, or you know, that's the first step. Right?
Yeah.
If you're okay with that and you engage with that, then the next step is you're going to get a photo of my member. You know?
Yes. But it's really, like, I try to tell people, it's so attractive to just talk to somebody without anything about sex coming up.
Yeah.
It's so cool and attractive. Like, just be a human. Be a human. And let me know that you think about other things other than your parts or my parts and putting them together.
Yeah, that's refreshing.
Right? Yes, absolutely.
Go back to, old
Junior
school,
high?
right?
Yeah.
Old school dating.
Oh, yes, absolutely.
Yeah,
Yes.
yeah. So let's talk about when, you've been with someone a long time, you're divorced, and finally, you've made that connection, you're ready to have sex with that person. And in the moment, there's some emotions that can take you by surprise.
Oh, sure.
And what are some of those emotions? How do they manifest, and how do you handle them or even explain them?
Lisa, you asked the biggest questions. We could literally podcast about every one of these questions. So
Okay, let's do.
Okay, so hopefully I'm honoring this in a way that feels satiating for you and your listeners at the moment. Emotions, grief, anxiety. There are a lot of people with a lot of sexual trauma, a lot. And 1 in every 3 female has sexual trauma. And stats say 1 in every 6 males. We think that's underreported because of the psychology for men not feeling comfortable sharing that something's happened to them. So there are a lot of traumatized people out there. And there's a lot of trauma within marriage, or can be. There's a surprising amount of sexual trauma in marriage. So depending on the person's personal experience, depending on if they felt betrayed by their partner, you said affairs were the number one reason. If the affair was sexual, it's going to feel triggering. It's going to feel risky. It's going to feel vulnerable. So that would be something as a therapist I would really want to coach people around of, do your work to heal the trauma from feeling betrayed by your original partner before you hop in with a new one. New relationships will always show us where we're still unhealed. That's what human relationships do. But if you're willing to do the work of healing, just be curious about it. I think, again, it depends on the individual, depends on their previous experiences in their love life, in their sex life, etc. So it could be a whole gamut of excitement, joy, passion, fun, relief. I have some people that they're like, I didn't know sex could be this good, or I haven't been with a lover who was so selfless or cared about my pleasure. So sometimes it's like tears of like feeling overwhelmed, but in a good way. So people can go all over the spectrum, Miss Lisa, with this, because it's like, I didn't know, this is the first person that's ever cared about me and like wanted to take care of me. So they, that's like refreshing and healing.
Yeah, so that leads me to,
Okay.
It can be, if it's been the first time in a very, very long time, you can feel as though your body's been set on fire, right? And you can maybe overvalue the experience. And so what are some red flags we should watch for, that we're not just, mind blown by the sex itself and we're not pursuing the other parts of the relationship? What's good about it?
That's a hard one, because once that horse takes off for the barn, I don't know if you've ever been on a horse that's taken off for the barn. I've done that. That's scary as heck, because you're like, I'm going to lose my head as we're going under the awning here. It's a pretty powerful thing. So human sexuality is hard. So if it's what I'm hearing you say is, if we don't want it to become the only thing that we're focusing on, I think it's great for us to have accountability. Could be small group, could be best friends, could be a therapist, a mentor, but having accountability to check in and say, so tell me how the relationship's going. What are y'all doing to get to know each other? Green flags, red flags, and just having somebody that you feel like you can be totally open and honest with, and just saying, honestly, all we do is get together and act like bunnies or whatever the thing, and having people. I think we need community. I think when we date, we need community. And Americans are notorious, especially white America, is notorious for total independence, isolation, going to do this on myself. And that's just not healthy for a lot of reasons. But having community for accountability and checking in and kind of keeping it real with us, I think is super helpful and healthy. Obviously, I'm biased. Like I said, therapists are helpful. Depending on your therapist and their values and moral codes and what your goals are. If you can, with your new partner, trying to check in about how you're both feeling, about the rate of physicality that you're both continuing to engage in. But again, human nature is like, if you have chemistry and you've been starved, it's really easy to want to binge for a while.
Oh, right.
Does that make
but
sense?
I like the concept of, asking, what are you doing to get to know each other better?
Yeah.
Because that prompts,
Yes, ma'am.
what are you doing outside the bedroom?
Yes, absolutely.
And making you think, well, maybe we should go outside.
Maybe we should go eat in public. Yeah.
Right?
I love it. You're awesome. Yes. Maybe we should leave the house.
Maybe we should leave the house.
You're hilarious. That's so real, though.
Oh, gosh.
So real. It's like a mini
I don't
honeymoon.
know yet, but
Right.
I can only imagine.
Yes, ma'am.
Yeah.
So. Good for you.
So I do want to, before we, come to the end, I want to talk about the porn industry.
Sure.
Because in our brunch, you talked about how the porn industry has changed how some men perceive sex. And can you talk about that? Because if you've been
Yes, I can.
out of it for a long time,
Yeah.
and then suddenly you're dating, and these guys are maybe wanting to do acts that
Yeah.
you're not comfortable with.
Yeah.
Would you tell us a little bit about your experience with all that?
I can. I don't want to traumatize you or the listeners.
Okay.
So just trigger warning. Yeah, it's actually influencing men and women. There are more and more women watching it just as much as men. So it's not just a male issue anymore. It's a cultural issue. So a third of the internet is pornography. That's a third of the internet is pornography. 80% of my generation, I'm at the top of the millennials, 80% of the men in my generation are regularly viewing it. 80% of the porn industry is abuse against women. So I'm very biased, and I would not judge a client for coming in. Like, my heart is not judgment, but I will say I believe it's 100% demonic. I think it's evil. It's destructive, and it's destructive on 20 different levels. There's nothing about it that honors women. There's nothing about it that honors sex. It's a very it teaches lazy sex. It teaches it's all about me and my needs, and if you don't do what I want, then I'll just scroll to the next image or the next video and take what I want. So it creates a lot of sexual narcissism, like very self-centered, self-absorbed. I'm concerned about some part of my job is understanding the brain and something called classical conditioning. So what our brains do is we watch things as humans. We're supposed to do this. This is God's design before pornography was around. We're supposed to watch other humans and go, oh, this is how I do this. Those are called mirror neurons. I'm watching you do it. And men are very kinesthetic. They love YouTube. I'm going to watch how you did this, and I'm going to do how he did it. So you take that mindset of, how are they doing it? Should I try this? And then you pair it with sexual arousal. It becomes a very potent drug. So the unfortunate piece, for example, now is like they're doing interesting studies with adolescents in Europe and elsewhere, and even public schools here, and finding that choking, for example, and acts of violence against females in adolescent sex are enormously prevalent right now because of that's mainstream pornography.
That's scary.
It's very
it seems
scary.
as though it's getting introduced to people younger and younger.
That's absolutely correct. Yeah, it's really scary. So I think we're going to have we are 100%, but we will continue to have a whole new pandemic of brokenness and mental illness because of the porn industry. I could talk for days about this. This is a huge passion point. It poisons the brain. As far as from a dopamine perspective, it's like addictive levels. So if somebody's masturbating to pornography, you're teaching the brain and body, I can get turned on very quickly with minimal effort. And so that's basically what addiction does, right? So like I don't have to do anything to get high, and I'm just high. So it's completely toxic. And so how it shows up then is I look at a person as a composite of parts to be used for my own pleasure. I don't see you as a human. I don't see that you have a soul, a mind, a spirit, a calling, a story, relationships. You're something to use. And when I'm done, I can just throw you away. I don't have to connect or attach to you.
Yeah, so is it true that it also encourages people to need more to get excited? Like they need more unusual behaviors to get excited?
Depending on how often somebody's using it, the prevalency of it being paired with masturbation, which is more often than not. Yes, usually what happens is because of porn sex or a pornified mindset is just dopamine. You're just chasing the high. It's kind of like gambling, shopping, fishing, scrolling, cocaine, meth. All those are the excitatory reward centers in the brain. So if somebody's struggling with addiction or creating addiction with that, yes, you're going to have to take more extreme measures to reach the same level of cognitive arousal. You're literally creating neural pathways in the brain that your arousal circuits are going to follow down. What wires together what fires together wires together. And again, a brain that is sexually aroused, that's the most powerful electrical experience the human brain can have. So sexual arousal is very powerful. So when people come out of a pornified mindset, I do a lot of work with people that are like, hey, I've been watching porn for decades and it's really messing with me. It's hard to get turned on with my husband or my wife. I want to rewire my brain. You can do that. There's a process to do it.
That's encouraging.
Yeah, praise God. But there's a lot of like detoxing that people have to do. But yes, one of the unfortunate pieces is I'm watching this thing on the screen. I'm getting into my fantasy life where I'm dissociating, I'm checking out. And then all of a sudden when I'm with a real live human, well, this isn't the same. I have to talk to you. I have to be nice to you. You're not just doing the thing. Like you relate to me. You have feelings, you have reactions. Does that make sense?
That makes a lot of sense. So what do you do if you're, dating and you finally are in that spot with somebody?
Yeah.
And they want you to perhaps do some things you're not comfortable with, or perhaps they,
sure.
Like, as you mentioned, the whole choking thing that's growing right now.
Well, I am a huge advocate for boundaries, and I do a lot of work around sexual trauma with clients because trauma teaches us, or cultural norms teach us, especially us ladies, and I found this with men as well, but it's more prevalent with women, teaches us that sex is all about the man. Sex is just for him. So I just need to comply. I need to submit. I just need to go along with it. And that's not true at all. One of my biggest passion points as a really intense woman is that your pleasure matters. Your boundaries and what you want should matter just as much. God's heart for you is that your pleasure and your boundaries are just as important as the man that you may be involved with. So no matter what culture's taught you, what your family's taught you, what the church has taught you, what porn has taught you, a lot of my work with women, especially in the South, is to teach them to find their voice and to speak up and set boundaries. And if he gets mad, if he has a temper tantrum, or she gets mad and has a temper tantrum, then we work through, like, if they want to work on that, what's that about? And if they're just going to continue to be selfish or dishonoring about boundaries, then that's probably not the person for you.
Right.
Does that make sense?
That makes a lot of sense.
Yeah.
Be comfortable speaking up and,
absolutely.
advocating for yourself.
Yes, ma'am.
Because at the end of the day, if you go along with something you're not comfortable with, the guilt that you will feel will be on your shoulders, not theirs. They will have gone away feeling satisfied.
Sure.
And you'll feel guilty.
Yeah, and it makes people feel small. But again, if people have unhealed trauma, and a lot of us do, we're used to feeling small. So when sex makes me feel small and shameful, and that's my normal template, people don't know anything different. So they're like, well, I guess this is what I'm supposed to do. It's just always been this way.
Oh, gosh. That makes me sad.
Yeah, it's very sad, but there's also hope for healing. But
right.
Yes, ma'am. It is a sad phenomenon. Absolutely.
There is. Well, there is so much more that we can talk about.
Yes,
but I did want to ask you just one more question before we wrap up.
Sure.
I listened to your podcast, your Healthy Sex podcast.
Yes,
and
ma'am.
Your faith is very important to you, and that's very obvious in listening. So how do you weave your faith into the work that you do?
That's such a huge question,
I
Lisa.
know.
All these, you're so good at big picture questions. Yeah, I think that we could talk for. I think it just depends. For one, if I'm working with a couple or an individual, I will start by checking in with them about that. So it was part of my informed consent as a clinician, I'll say. So my faith informs me, and my morals and my value system. Therapists are not robots. We all have our own sense of right and wrong, etc. I align myself with Jesus and the teaching, my understanding of the Bible and the Holy Spirit. Do you want that to be part of our work? And if they say yes, then we'll kind of check in about what level of integration do you think you may want to incorporate? And then we'll kind of tease that out. I have a lot of clients that are saying, no, I'm good. Please don't say anything to do with it. Faith, religion, but, cool. I think the good Lord has designed it so that truth is truth all across the board, whether or not we acknowledge where it comes from. He's just cool like that. He uses all things to reach us. So I personally, I rely on the Holy Spirit. I try to press in and ask the Holy Spirit to be present every session. He's all knowing. He can do things in 5 minutes that would take 30 years to do. So I believe he's the one that does the ultimate healing. He blesses me with revelation. It's hard, because everyone is living their life outside of my office, and all I have is what's right there in front of me on a couch. So he'll give me downloads, pictures of what's going on for people. He'll give me a word, and I'll mention it, and people burst into tears and go, "Why did you know that?" And I'll be like, "That was the Lord." So I try to incorporate the Spirit of the Lord, because it's just a lot more fun when he's at the helm. It's a lot more fun when he's leading than I'm striving in my flesh and trying to peacock and show how much I know. But people don't care. They just want to feel better. So for me personally, I try to keep the Lord involved. I pray over my space. I clean it up when I'm done for the day spiritually, because people bring stuff in, Klingons, etc. So I clean that up, ask the Lord to bless it, that people would walk in and experience his presence, that they'd find hope and healing that they haven't been able to find. So I don't know if that answers your question.
That does.
Lisa.
Thank you very much.
Yes,
well,
ma'am.
This has been a fascinating conversation, and I think we probably could go for 2 or 3 more podcasts.
Yes, thank you for the opportunity.
Would you please share your social media presence,
Sure.
your podcast, and how people can reach out to you?
Yeah, thanks, Lisa. So my podcast is called The Healthy Sex Podcast. You could find that on Apple or Spotify and Zencast, or if you go to my website, iloveusintimacy.com. My podcast is linked to my website. My website is iloveusintimacy.com. My social media, Instagram and Facebook, are ILU Relationships. ILU Relationships. I'm pretty easy to find. So,
all right. Yeah. Wonderful. Well, thank you for joining me today.
Thank you for the privilege, Lisa. I really appreciate you.
Well, it has been a pleasure, and I would ask that you join us for our next episode, and be sure to subscribe to the Silver Divorce Podcast. And would you kindly leave us a rating and a review? Ratings and reviews are very important to raise us up in the algorithm, so all of those podcast platforms show us to more people, and also it helps us to attract great guests. So whether you are newly divorced or are in the divorce process, we'll help you navigate, and we'll tell you things that your attorney might not tell you. Until next time, remember, divorce is an event. It does not define who you are. I'm Lisa, and I'll see you next time.